The blue lights hit your rearview mirror out of nowhere. Your chest tightens just a little, even if you've done nothing wrong. You pull over, engine humming, hands suddenly feeling heavier than usual on the steering wheel. The officer walks up slowly, measured steps, scanning everything. Your car, your posture, your face. Then it happens. They lean in slightly and say, "I smell alcohol." And right there, in that moment, everything can change. Let me ask you something before we go any further. Have you ever been in a situation where a police officer said something that caught you off guard during a traffic stop and you weren't sure how to respond? If you have, I want you to actually share that experience in the comments. Seriously, there's a reason I'm asking. Because what you felt in that moment, the hesitation, the pressure, the confusion, that's exactly where most people make critical mistakes. And a little later, I'm going to explain something that most drivers completely misunderstand about that exact phrase. I smell alcohol. Now, let's slow this down and really walk through what's happening here, because this is not just about words. This is about psychology, timing, and control of the situation. When an officer says, "I smell alcohol," they are not making casual conversation. That statement is strategic, it's intentional, it's designed to trigger a reaction from you, and more importantly, it's often used to establish probable cause for further investigation. Here's where people go wrong immediately. Most drivers panic just a little. Even if they've only had one drink hours ago or none at all, they feel accused. And what do people do when they feel accused? They start explaining. "I only had one beer. It was earlier tonight. I'm totally fine to drive." That right there is the trap. Because now you've just admitted to drinking. You've just confirmed part of the officer's suspicion. And you've done it voluntarily without being required to say anything. Let me be very clear about something. In the United States, you are not required to answer investigative questions during a traffic stop. You must provide your license, registration, and proof of insurance when requested. But beyond that, you have the right to remain silent. So when an officer says, "I smell alcohol," what they are really doing is watching how you respond. They are analyzing your tone, your body language, your eye movement, your hesitation. They are building a mental case in real time. Now here's the part that most people came here for. What should you actually say in that moment? You say something calm, simple, and controlled. "I'm choosing to remain silent." That's it. Not aggressive, not sarcastic, not defensive, just clear and steady. "I'm choosing to remain silent." Now I know what some of you are thinking already. Won't that make me look guilty? That's one of the biggest myths out there. Silence is not guilt. Silence is a constitutional right, and more importantly, it prevents you from accidentally giving the officer information they can use against you. Let's walk through a realistic scenario. The officer leans in slightly. "I smell alcohol. Have you been drinking tonight?" There's a pause. You feel it, that pressure, that expectation that you should answer. If you say, "Just one drink," you've now opened the door. The officer can follow up. "What time was that? What kind of drink? Where were you coming from? Who are you with?" Notice what's happening? The questions start stacking. Each one is designed to build a narrative. Now compare that to this. "I'm choosing to remain silent." Now the dynamic changes. The officer may try again. "Okay, but I just need to know if you've had anything to drink." Again, calm. "I'm choosing to remain silent." At this point, the officer has to rely on actual observations instead of your words. And that matters more than you might think. Because here's something most drivers don't realize. Officers are trained to look for indicators of impairment that go beyond what you say. They're watching your eyes, your speech pattern, your coordination, how you retrieve your documents, whether your hands are shaking, how quickly you respond, whether you interrupt. Even something as small as fumbling your wallet can be interpreted as a sign of impairment. Not always fairly, but that's how it's often perceived. Now imagine you combine that with an admission like, "I had one drink." That small statement can suddenly carry more weight when paired with those observations. And here's where it gets even more complicated. Sometimes officers will repeat themselves, not because they didn't hear you, but because they're trying to get a different answer. I smell alcohol. Are you sure you haven't been drinking? That repetition is intentional. It creates pressure. It makes you feel like maybe you should clarify, explain, or soften your previous response. This is where a lot of people break. They start thinking, maybe I should just be honest and clear things up. But the reality is, you're not in a casual conversation. You're in a legal interaction where anything you say can be used as evidence. And here's another detail that often goes unnoticed. The phrase, "I smell alcohol," itself is subjective. There's no measurement, no device, no objective proof in that moment. It's based on the officer's perception. And perception can be influenced by a lot of things. Maybe you were at a place where others were drinking. Maybe there's a scent in the car. Maybe it's completely mistaken. But once that statement is made, it sets the tone for the rest of the stop. Now let's talk about what might happen next. If the officer believes there's enough suspicion, they may ask you to step out of the vehicle. Go ahead and step out for me. This is where the situation becomes more serious. At this point, many drivers start thinking, okay, now I need to cooperate more to show I'm not guilty. And again, that instinct can backfire. Because once you're outside the vehicle, the officer has a clearer view of your balance, your movement, your coordination. They may ask you to perform field sobriety tests. Can you walk in a straight line? Follow my finger with your eyes. Here's something important that a lot of people don't realize. In most states, these field sobriety tests are voluntary. You can refuse them. And before you react to that, understand this carefully. Refusing a field sobriety test does not mean you won't face consequences. It may increase suspicion. It may lead to further steps like a breath test or even arrest if the officer believes they have probable cause. But what it does do is prevent you from participating in tests that are highly subjective and often difficult even for sober individuals. Think about it. Standing on one leg on the side of a road at night, with cars passing, lights flashing, adrenaline high, even a perfectly sober person can struggle. Now imagine the officer is already leaning towards suspicion because they smell alcohol. Do you see how quickly this can escalate? Let's go back to the vehicle for a moment, because there's another subtle tactic that happens often. The officer might take your license and registration and hold on to them longer than necessary. They might walk back to their car, come back, ask more questions, leave again. This creates time pressure. It makes you uneasy. It makes you want to talk just to break the silence. And sometimes, passengers get involved. Has he been drinking? Where are you guys coming from? Passengers often don't know what to do. They may try to help, but in doing so, they may unintentionally provide information that complicates things. This is why it's so important to understand that every person in that vehicle is part of the situation, whether they realize it or not. Now let's talk about tone, because this is something that can quietly change everything. If you respond with attitude, sarcasm, or hostility, the situation can escalate quickly. Even if you're legally in the right, your tone can influence how the officer proceeds. But being polite does not mean being talkative. You can be respectful and still exercise your rights. Here are my documents, officer. I'm choosing to remain silent. Calm, steady, no sudden movements, no unnecessary explanations. And here's a moment that catches a lot of people off guard. The officer might soften their tone. Look, I'm just trying to make sure you're safe to drive. Help me out here. That shift is strategic. It feels less confrontational. It feels like cooperation is the right thing to do. But the legal reality hasn't changed. Anything you say can still be used against you. And this is where discipline matters. Not aggression, not fear, just discipline. Now I want to circle back to something I hinted at earlier, a mistake that even careful drivers make. It's not just what you say, it's when you say it. Some drivers stay silent at first, but then after a few minutes of pressure, they start talking. They think, maybe now it's okay. But by that point, the officer has already observed your behavior. They've already formed an impression. And now your words are being added on top of that. Consistency matters. If you choose to remain silent, you stick with it. Not halfway, not until it gets uncomfortable. Fully. Because inconsistency can raise more suspicion than silence itself. Now let me be realistic with you. Even if you do everything right, you stay calm, you remain silent, you're respectful, that does not guarantee the officer will let you go. They can still make decisions based on their observations, but what you're doing is protecting yourself from making the situation worse. You're removing one of the biggest variables, your own words, and that's more powerful than most people realize. Because in many cases, it's not the initial stop that causes legal trouble. It's what the driver says during the interaction. Small statements, casual admissions, attempts to explain. That's what builds the case. So the next time you see those blue lights in your mirror and your heart rate ticks up just a little, remember this. You're not just being pulled over. You're entering a controlled interaction where every word, every movement, every pause is being observed. And if you ever hear those words, "I smell alcohol," you already know what comes next. A pause, a decision, and a simple response that can quietly change the direction of everything that follows. I'm choosing to remain silent.